If your asset inventory doesn't integrate well with other applications such as Splunk, SAP, ServiceNow or custom-built software, you're not getting the full value out of it. I'm Ralph Langner, and in this video I'll show you how the OT-based asset management platform allows you to retrieve inventory items using REST and Python. In this video, I'm not going to provide a general introduction to REST because I did that already in a different video that you can find on our YouTube channel. Instead, we go straight to the technical details. So let's jump right into it. Let's first pull device data using REST in our browser to get a feel for it. Focus on the URL that we use to access OT-based Asset Center. We copy that URL to a new browser window and then append it with API/v1 for the version, followed by the devices resource and followed by the identifier of the device that we're interested in. In our example, we use the device ID fr.plc1 and then hit enter. Now we have to authenticate because the REST API in OT-base requires authentication. And there is our output. Even though it is certainly not intended for the human reader, as you can see, you can still get an idea of all the relevant information because it is in clear text. Now let's assume that we didn't know the identifier for the device that we're interested in, but instead we would know its IP address. So what we can do is we can also search for a device by IP address if we have it, and then we remove the device identifier and instead specify the filter IP address equals followed by an IP address. And there we have it again. That's the same result, and as you can see, it works as well. Now let's do the same thing in Python. First we import the requests module in order to make accessing our OT-based asset center a little bit easier. And then from requests, we call the get method and use the URL that we used earlier in the browser in order to search by IP address. And for authentication, we specify a very bad username and password that we have just configured in our OT-based asset center for demonstration purposes. You shouldn't see that in production use. Okay, so after we have executed this method, let's look at the result. Apparently that did work. The response code is 200. And let's look at the content of the result. And there is the information that we're looking for. It's the device data for that specific device identified by IP address as a string. Now let's do another example with the device identifier. And we use that same identifier as before, fr.plc1, and the same authentication. And let's look at the results. And there it is again. Now remember that our result that is stored in r.text is a string, but maybe what you ultimately want to use is the result as a JSON dictionary. So you would need to convert the string into a dictionary, which is pretty easy. First we import the JSON module, and then we simply say D for our new dictionary is json.loadsr.text. Let's look at the result. There we go. That looks much better. And if we want to get rid of the data root element here that we are not really interested in, we would simply say D equals D, or the content of the data element, and then we are good to go, because now we can access the various configuration elements from our device directly, such as device ID or such as description. Before we go on, let me remind you that you can even access more information about a device than what you see here in this output, because there are additional sub-resources for a given device. And let's just check this out. In an example where we are interested in retrieving the software, or in our case the firmware that is running on the device. In order to do that, we simply append the resource for this device with software. And let's look at the result again. And there we have the software. So the REST API tells us that there is a firmware identified on this device, and it tells us the name, the vendor, and especially the version. You can also use the REST API to change device data, as we will do in our last example. And this applies both to changing single device entries or changing multiple device entries in a bulk operation. The difference to what we have done so far is that for updating device data, we are using a POST request rather than the GET that we used earlier. And when we are using POST, we are not specifying our additional commands, parameters, etc. in the URL, but in the content, as you see here. And let's see how this is done in Python. Since we cannot put the parameters for our post method in the URL, we're going to define a variable which we call payload that stores our parameters. And let's just say we are reassigning the device ID of our sample device to something funny. And certainly we also need to add some quotation marks. And now we can call the post method from requests, which gets our URL. Followed by the payload and the authentication. Let's see how that worked. That looks not too shabby. Let's check for the log message of OT-based Asset Center, and there we have it. So Asset Center tells us in its log entry that the device was updated. Let's check it out in Asset Center. Now that we know the device ID of the device that we're interested in, the easiest way to pull the profile of the device is to simply enter the device ID in the quick search of OT-based Asset Center. So let's just try that. And there we go. There is our device profile for the device ID that we have just changed. Let's go down to the timeline of the device, where we can also see that this device was changed via a REST import, and the user was our test user account. And we also see the details for that change. Thanks to the REST API, integrating the OT-based asset management platform with other applications is really super simple. To learn more about OT-based, check our website langner.com/ot-base.